Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Lean HE Encore Americas. I'm Krista Schulte. I lead the Organizational Excellence team at the University of Michigan. I also serve as chair of Lean in Higher Ed for the Americas. I want to let you know that Organizational Excellence is privileged to host this event on behalf of Lean in Higher Ed. I also want to thank the Organizational Excellence team for handling the logistics. And I want to extend a special thank you to the Shared Services Center's video conferencing team for handling all of the supporting technology to make this happen. If you're not familiar with Lean in Higher Ed, let me tell you that they host an annual global conference. It moves through 3 different regions, the Americas, Europe, and Asia Pacific. It can be difficult for people to attend, especially when the conference is in another region. This year marks the introduction of Encore events. The intent of this event is to share some of the presentations from the conference with a wider community. Encore or Europe has hosted 2 Encore events this spring, and we're pleased to bring this event to the Americas. So thank you for being here. We'll be moving quickly through our program today, hence our prompts start right at 1. We'd like to bring you 3 presentations, plus a preview of the next Lean HE conference, which is coming soon. It'll be held in Cambridge, England in October. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Kim Snage, who will be moderating our first 2 presentations. Kim's the chair of graduate studies in the School of Business at Conestoga College in Ontario. She also serves as the Marketing and Outreach Officer for Lean HE Americas. Kim, take it away.
Welcome back, everyone. That was a short break. We're thrilled to introduce our next set of speakers. So just hang tight for 1 second. The next session that we have is reducing resistance in projects. And this ties in so well to the previous one because there are a lot of questions about change management, stakeholder buy-in, faculty engagement. So this is, I think, really going to help us hone in on that just a little bit. So I'm thrilled to introduce our next 2 speakers, Candice Beckman. Candice Beckman is a lean facilitator at the University of Texas at Arlington, bringing 15 years of experience in higher education to her role. With an understanding of academic institutions, Candice specializes in guiding individuals and teams through the problem-solving journey and supporting the successful implementation of changes. I'd also like to introduce you to Tabitha Wiles. Tabitha Wiles serves as a business process consultant and change management practitioner, also at the University of Texas at Arlington. Her background includes personal and professional process improvement through coaching and development plans, training facilitation and development, and operations and change management. During her experience, Tabitha has supported, coached, and collaborated with individuals and groups around the globe to promote and support positive change. So definitely a great segue to our next presenters. So go ahead, Tabitha and Candice, take it away.
Thank you. I'll get our slides pulled up here and then we'll get started. All right. So we will talk about reducing resistance in projects, and we'll give you a little bit of information about kind of our background of our team so you have some context about where we started and kind of what our journey has been, along with our topics for today, which are going to be how we align lean and change management practices, and how we blend those methods in projects. And we'll be specifically focusing on large enterprise scale projects. Our team does rapid improvement embeds with groups across campus and smaller tasks. And then we also fold into large scale enterprise projects when we buy a new system or make a massive change through processes across the organization. And the last thing we'll talk about is how we partner with our sponsors in those large scale projects, and how we utilize lean and change management methods to bring them information so they have what they need to make decisions through those big change periods. We've had a 5-year journey. Our team's fairly new still. we started just right before the pandemic. So at the end of 2019, our team expanded. Before that, it was one individual, and that's our manager, Karen Kusler. And she brought on 2 more people, and our team expanded to 3. And then as we were starting our strategic plans and starting to launch our training program, that was, of course, the beginning of 2020. And so we grew as we were dealing with all of the shifts from the pandemic. Today, our team has grown, and we now have 5 individuals, and we are nested next to our strategic team, our project management office, and then our training and communications team. So that sets us up to do a lot of the things we're talking about today, because we have all of those elements aligned, and we're all nestled within our IT department. So we align both lean and change management within projects. And I'll give you a quick overview of how we do that from the lean side as well as the change management side. For lean, we focus on helping projects identify and clarify problems. So we do a lot of assessment of the problem when we first get called in to go work on these projects. We are checking what is the need for the change, what is the willingness and readiness of those groups to work on that problem and make shifts and improvements. We have a specific tool that we start with called Air One, and we'll introduce you guys to that here in a few minutes. And what we really focus on there is probing questions. We ask a lot of questions, get a lot of clarity before we are jumping in and doing any process work. The second part of how we fold lean into projects is actually the process work there. And we ask the question, do we need an inventory? Is this a large enough change that we need to inventory the processes? Because we're not just changing one often. We may be changing a whole business units, the way they work. So we may go in and inventory. They may have 10, 15, 20, or 50 processes that may be touched by a large organizational change. And then we look at, okay, what do we need to map? What do we need to understand about this change that is coming? And what current state maps do we need to document? And then moving on into more of those lean practices of waste analysis, flow, pool, and creating that future state. And so we overlay all of these items. And from the change management perspective, we identify the people that are impacted. And we gain some of that information from conversations with sponsors, from process maps, from stakeholder conversations. We are looking at the beginning of a project to document the impacted groups and a high summary of what we're impacting there. We may not know every detail at the beginning of a project, but we want to know who over all of the work we're doing we're going to touch. And we're trying to find out what level they're at, what level we're going to impact them. Is that group going to have to learn something new? Are they going to have changes to the role and the way they do their work? And how large is that impact? So those are the pieces of information we're looking for. And then we're looking for the impact to the organization. So how are we going to impact individuals? And then what is the impact at the organizational level? How big is this change? How much effort is going to be needed to support the people that are impacted through that change? And what other changes are going on around the organization? Do we have 15 projects hitting faculty all at once? And if so, we want to be aware of that as best as we can so that we can adjust timelines, schedules, and information that rolls out to those groups in an appropriate way. When we first started folding these elements into our practice, we had a project management office that was well established. Like I said, we started forming and growing our department about 5 years ago. Our project management office had probably been around a couple of years before that, so they were more established. So when we first started our journey, projects were going smoothly. They were having their scope, their charter, they were having their schedules, and then we were being brought in to do current state and starting to weave in process improvement practices. Over time, we then started to implement more change management techniques. And so we kind of had this stair-step approach. And we have decided to move to and shift to where we're pulling all of these processes together. We want them to work in alignment so they're feeding into one another in a more seamless way. And what that looks like is we start with some conversation around assessing readiness in alignment with a project being scoped. And then that feeds in and can give some information there to our project manager as well as our sponsor. How ready is the organization for this change? While we're also assessing that change, who's impacted? How will that focus and refine the scope of that project? And on the flow or on down the flow we go. So if we're doing that process inventory, that helps us know what are all the elements that we're going to need for things like charters or work breakdown structures, as well as what's the impact going to be to the organization. So we can clearly define that as we get started. So we have that end goal in mind, that future state. Once we actually get into the execution and implementation of the project, that's when we start to capture things like maps and do waste analysis and start to craft those future state plans. At the same time, we're folding and crafting and building that story to communicate to all of the impacted parties we've discovered in the beginning of the flow. We're shifting to this model so that we're creating pull rather than a push process. And some tactics we are using to create that pull method are that we've got that team that we've grown to 5 now. So we have a process improvement and a change manager on these large enterprise projects. Depending upon how large they are, or how big the impact is, it may be the same individual because we're trained in both areas. Or we may have 2 people. So our example today that we'll be talking about, Tabitha and I are working on a large enterprise project. Tabitha is the process improvement person, and then myself as the change management person. So we have that information, we have that connection there to collect all of that information for the project. The other item is that we're setting our process improvement and change manager at the same level as the project manager. So they're getting similar access to the sponsor for a lot of these conversations to make sure that that sponsor is informed of all of the elements. So project management areas, what's going on in processes and how is this going to be impacted? What changes are we making? Along with how are people dealing with that change? And are we communicating at the right level to the organization?
So as Candice mentioned, some of our tactics, the tools that we utilize often to create pull is discovery projects. So we know sometimes that we need more information to kind of design and help plan what the problem is. And Candice mentioned process inventory. So we tend to do this more often than not with most projects. And it really helps to find what will be impacted. So that way, when we're implementing something, we're really not struggling. And then that change assessment supports with defining who's impacted, what's impacted, and how the impact happens. And these tactics really help to create the narrative, and we can utilize this narrative with the sponsor, and it helps to deepen that change story. So when we start developing materials and the plan, we have a better idea on where we're going. So as we blend the two, lean and change management, we look at when we're defining value and defining what we're changing. So looking at defining that problem, we're assessing that problem, and looking at our willingness and readiness to work that problem. So that kind of leads into mapping that stream. So we also want to identify who's impacted through the inventory, and our inventory really helps us to define these processes, these groups. And we look at some of these functions and the effort of these groups so we can create that flow and look at, as we're designing that future state, how it will be better than it was before. And one tool that we use for this is Air One. So Candice kind of mentioned we do this to kind of get a little bit deeper understanding of what the problem is. And at this point, we're getting clear, and it helps us to blend that change management and lean practice. And we generally use this with the sponsor first. And an example that we'll provide is, Candice mentioned earlier, is the process improvement position that I was in, and then Candice was doing the change management.
So we talk about partnering with our sponsor, and that's something we really, really focus on. So blending our lean and our change management practices is really about supporting that sponsor through getting this organizational change completed. One area of focus that we help support with is, can the story be told? And how can we tell that story? So we're leveraging those elements of lean and change management to get information to our sponsors so that we can tell that story and we can help them develop the components of that need to be rolled out to the organization. So we're supporting with communications. We're supporting with helping schedule them in areas where they need to go speak with people. We're also listening and monitoring for risks in the organization. Has something cropped up that we didn't think about or we weren't aware of when we originally assessed the project and the change? Also crafting, why are we doing this? What is the problem? Making sure we're clearly communicating that across all of the impacted groups. Also, what's going to change for them? How is that process going to change? If we're launching a new piece of software, the process is going to adjust, not just that we're getting a new piece of software, but that process is going to change. And what is that going to look like? And really clearly communicating with each impacted group, whether that be a section of faculty, students, or staff. What are those future state impacts and how do we communicate them clearly? So how do we get there when we're working with that sponsor? We really focus on developing a relationship with them as soon as we start that project. So it's just like reforming or forming any new team. We kind of have to go through that storming to get to the norming. So we have to form, get through any difficult conversations, and then get to that normalization where we're working well together. So we focus on doing that and building that relationship. We want to get to know that leader and where they're at so that we can support them and their goals. Sometimes we have new leaders, and so we need to meet them where they're at and maybe do a little extra coaching. If we have a very seasoned leader, we may be more hands-off with them. They may know what they need to say, what they need to do, where they need to go. We're just there to support and help provide that information to them. Again, we're really big about bringing the sponsors information on the impact that the change is having through our process improvement activities, through our change assessment, so that they have clear visibility of what's going on so they can make those tough leadership decisions that occur in a project. And then we're helping them prepare that story for consumption. So like I said, we are lined up with not only our project management office, but our communication and training teams in our area. So we're able to leverage those two groups to pull in and form emails, slideshows, decks, websites, you name it. We have a team that can go through and create those materials and support that sponsor through the change. So looking and kind of circling back to what elements of lean and what elements of change management do we use in this partnership? So process inventories, that can help our sponsors see not only what are they changing, but at a more granular level. So we list in our process inventories every process that's being touched, whether that has a standard operating procedure, if it has a process map associated with it, and if it needs those items. Is it a large enough process that we need to do some documentation, or do we have some existing documentation? Then that helps us analyze where we're going to be impacting the organization, any hangups or risks we might encounter, and also who we're going to be impacting. Is there a small group that we didn't think of that we pick up through a process inventory? And with change management, we're doing a change assessment at the beginning of the project to identify those people that are impacted and the level of impact. And then we're also using all of those elements from the process improvement piece, along with this change assessment to help us start craft that story and then offer that support of making those packages for the consumption across the organization.
Thanks, Candice. So kind of tying that back into what Candice was mentioning, looking at our example here, where when we were leading, or I was leading the process inventory and mapping efforts, together, Candice and I worked together with the project manager, and Candice worked heavily with that sponsor to identify that story and work on developing that change analysis so we can kind of get a deeper understanding of all of the different components. And naturally, this wasn't just occurring all at one go. This occurred in layers, and through the connection that Candice and I work closely along with our communication team and that relationship with the project manager and sponsor, it really became successful and evolving and more clear as we continue doing the work. So in this travel system that we were implementing, or are implementing, I should say it's current, we did a lot of front load work at the beginning. We were completing that process inventory of that current state, and that helped to inform our change management analysis, again, with those impacted groups, what areas of the business unit are going to be impacted and what areas on campus were going to be impacted. And those process maps really helped us to identify specific areas of different systems, different groups, et cetera, that may be changing. So it helped to define what's changing. And so every time Candice got that other layer, we adapted and added to that change analysis. And it helped to generate the story again, talking to that sponsor so that sponsor could communicate to campus on what's going on, and that project manager to help inform those project management efforts. And so kind of looking at that from our new approach where we're incorporating the process improvement, change management, and project management, assessing that readiness, again, helping to define that scope while the change management is assessing that change and impact. And as we're looking at the process inventory, how we're going to define that charter, and then deeper impacts to groups, individuals, and areas of the organization. Additionally, drafting the current state, defining more within that documentation helps us to kind of identify what's that schedule while change management is really crafting that story. So the approach so far has really worked well. And I think that story and that narrative is really important because oftentimes that sponsor, the project manager, even that process work really benefits from that change management narrative.
Wonderful. Well, that's our presentation for today. Feel free to contact Tabitha, myself, or our colleague, Karen Kusler. Our information is here, and I'll pass it back to our moderator for the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Candice and Tabitha. It was a very interesting presentation and connected so well to the one that we had earlier this afternoon, is just how we implement those change management philosophies, and keeping in mind, I call it a trifecta. I know that's not the right word, but the integration of change, project, and lean. And it's such an important piece. So with that said, we're going to open up the panel for questions, and just give everyone just a minute or two to type some questions in the chat, and then I will bring them to all of you for response.
Kim, while we're waiting, I actually had a question. I was interested if you could tell us a little bit about the sponsors that you tend to work with. Who are they, and what kind of projects are they asking for help with?
Yeah, certainly. So we work with sponsors all across the organization. So I would say typically it's anywhere from a director up to the VP level. And they are, since we're in IT and these enterprise projects, it's typically we're getting a new system and making a shift to a new tool or revising items. When we're doing more of our process improvement events, that is when we're really focusing on a particular area and a particular process. And so those will be managers up to directors and VPs. So we have a lot of different sponsors across the organization. Anything to add, Tabitha?
No, I think other than what you said, we are introducing, it seems like, a more variety of sponsors as we continue practicing change management. I think we shifted the narrative initially to kind of defining what a sponsor is. And I think once sponsors are kind of aware of their role, I think there is more of a shift and buy-in from different folks around the campus being involved.
Perfect. We do have a couple of questions. I'm actually going to ask you one myself here real quick as well, is just knowing that you're in IT or that you work predominantly, let's say, with IT related projects, and I have that background myself. How do you support change fatigue? Or what are some of those things that you assess when it's just, every campus department wants to upgrade their technology at the same time, and you're easing this in because of the interdependency of those processes do impact some areas more than others? How do you support change fatigue?
So for that, we really ask a lot of questions at the beginning when we're able to. We're quite a large organization, so we don't always get the opportunity. But when we do get in there, and that's why we've been creating that pool flow, is so we're in at the beginning, so we can ask those questions about, okay, are you really ready to do this? It's going to require X, Y, and Z. Here's your inventory of processes. So it kind of gives people a moment to pause and think about, oh yeah, I'm buying a whole new tool, and we're going to have to change our processes when we get this new tool. So we try to build it up in the front as much as possible.
Thank you. And there's that perception sometimes that technology is going to solve a business process pain point without recognizing they have to fix the processes before we get technology to fix that. So definitely. Thank you so much, Candice. So we have a question from Michelle. Have you done anything creative to tell the story?
I'm smiling because that is totally a Candice question. She is one of the best storytellers I've ever met.
Thanks, Tabitha. I don't know as far as creative goes. Right now, we're really focusing on being intentional and reaching everyone. Making sure that we go to where they're at. So we're looking at those impacted groups. If, we're talking about that travel system, athletics has some very specific things. So we want to make sure we're going to them. We are tailoring our communications from the get-go and designing it so that I have a change story, but we've put all the elements when we're designing it so that I can package those out and send a sponsor to go talk to a specific audience. So trying to be intentional. I don't know how creative that is, but being intentional with, I know there's going to be 10 different subsections of audiences out there that we're going to have to talk to. So we're not going to use the same story necessarily for every audience. We're going to go out and make it specific for them.
It's really tailoring that message depending on the audience. Okay, thank you. So we know that, and this question coming here is not a surprise, I'm sure. So we all know that everyone wants the change, and we want to fix process, but then sometimes we don't want the change. It's a lot of work and effort. So the question from Jonathan is, have you come across processes that are in a state of complete paralysis where many people see the need for improvement? However, none of these people have an appetite for change or to change. How do you deal with this to move forward? So how do you get unstuck?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, we do come across groups like that. And I typically find that it's not that they are so resistant to change. It's that they've not had the opportunity to change in a strategic or a systematic way. And so that's part of what the process improvement and lean does, is typically when those groups are stuck like that and they're in the blame, they're saying, oh, we're being gaslit, or, oh, we've told people and no one will make the change. It's all about how they tell the story and communicate. And so going in and using those lean practices to kind of, shake up that group a little bit and bring their voice to the forefront and help them also learn to tell that story in a way that's not blaming and that has information with it. And then like things just start melting away typically. But you got to go through the rough work of that team going through that storming phase and keeping them focused on that path. That's what I see. That's what I do that helps. Because those groups do exist, but I usually find that when you're using that systematic method, it takes time, but eventually they start to see that they're all kind of on the same page and want similar items.
Wonderful. Thank you, Candice. And with that, sometimes I find as well, or some individuals will say that it's also tied to nothing happens when we go through these process improvement sessions. So what's the point? There's a lack of belief that it'll happen. And so when that starts to happen, there's tends to be also more buy-in to get unstuck and move it forward. Yeah. So Penny asks a question, do you find it more successful if the process role and change manager roles are different people?
It depends. And I really think it depends on the level of change. So when we're working smaller projects, change management is kind of an element of lean anyway. Like there's a lot of overlap there. So in smaller projects, if you know that, you're just doing it naturally and organically. In the larger scale projects, I do find it beneficial. And Tabitha, you jump in here as well. Like the project we shared today, I couldn't have done all of that work by myself. There's no way, it's too big. Because it's the whole travel system and as well as some purchasing processes. There's no way I could have mapped all of that and done the change management components. So smaller ones, I think it's fine to have the same person. Larger projects, definitely beneficial to have two.
I agree with Candice. I think the level of work that was involved with that enterprise project, I don't feel that if there was just one of us doing the change management and process improvement role, that we would have been thoroughly involved and intentional with the level of effort that it took. So I do think that it was beneficial to have two people for the size of that project.
So size of the project can determine the level of support needed. This next question, our final question for now, is from Nefra, and it's broken into 3 different questions, all tied to the same. So do you have trouble getting time from people generally because they're so tied up in their business as usual work that they struggle to make time for project work? And if so, do you have a way of getting past this, or do timelines extend beyond where they've hoped, or do stories help? And I'm fine to break that down into multiple questions, but people say that they're not available, they have busy operational work. How do you get past it? Do we just keep extending timelines, or do stories help?
All of the above. So yes, we encounter people who don't have time. We've really focused on when we go in and do a process improvement event, I know about how long it will take to get a group through there. Sometimes they don't believe that it'll take that long and we'll ask for a shorter timeline. So sometimes we do end up extending because they're like, oh, no, we have to get it done in this time. And I'm like, okay. And so we kind of negotiate with that. But we typically can get a group through that storming all the way to, do a current state, waste analysis, future state. We can do it in 12 weeks on average. Sometimes it takes longer. It depends on where that team is. If they're not in a formed state and we're going to have to go through a bunch of storming to get there, it can take longer. And then I may have to ask you to read back some of those. So there was timing. Yes, people will be too busy. I ask for in that 12 weeks that they commit 1 to 3 hours. So it's not a huge time commitment. We do that assessment up front and we try to get that engagement and say, it is going to take that much time. You are going to have to do work. And I really push that to the individual team members and delegate those tasks. Okay, I need you to do a waste analysis this week and go observe. I want you to spend 30 minutes doing this, write your notes, bring that to the conversation. So I really try to have them bring deliverables to those meetings when we get to projects where people are not showing up. that is an indication to me that they're not ready. And so that's a sponsor conversation typically, which is, okay, we're seeing people not showing up and having time. How do you want me to handle this? I can do A, B, or C. So just those relationships, knowing where people are at, and then having the conversations and saying, do we need to push a timeline? Is it not a good time right now? We'll come back in 3 months if that's the case. And sometimes that is the answer.
Thank you, Candice. I really appreciate that. And we have one more question from Tanya, but before I go back, I just wanted to ask just a question, Tabitha, based on what you said with sponsors and tying into what you said, Candice, as well. Do you find your sponsors, you need to train them on what a sponsor's role is? Or do you find some just get it organically, or some you kind of have to say, this is what I need from you, and this is what a sponsor's role is?
You want to go first, Tabitha?
Yeah, so I'll touch on that a little bit. I think Candice has worked with more sponsors in this context. I do think there are sponsors that initially seem very open and available. I think just even touching on some of those ground rules and expectations initially. And then if you see they kind of click, and then through their behavior and engagement, it's reinforced, then I don't think that there's necessarily a lot of coaching. However, when we were incorporating change management in that structure, in the pull structure, I think that there were more opportunities to have conversations with sponsors, and they might need more touch bases, more coaching. They might need more structure. They might need to have their calendar managed for them and specific notes on what to communicate. But Candice, I'll pass it to you so you can add, because I do feel like your experience is more holistic in that area.
Yeah. So that kind of goes back to what I was talking about with building that relationship with that sponsor, which is, where are they? Are they maybe a newer leader, or someone who hasn't done an enterprise-wide project before? Some leaders have, and they're well versed, and they jump right in. They know what their role is as sponsor. Others, they're new to that role, and so yeah, you do have to do some coaching and building of those connections and those direct asks.
Last question, and then we are going to wrap up for our break. So Tanya says, it sounds like both of you are well-versed in process improvement. Do you think it would work to have a process improvement expert on a large project with a project manager that has no background and little to no expertise in process improvement? Why or why not? And how would you address that skill or mindset difference?
Yes, it works. I've done it. In fact, we did that a lot during the pandemic, where I was partnered with a project manager. That was not their background at all, process improvement. But that we grew that relationship, and that's where that level of the project manager and process improvement person being treated equally in the project matters. I think that's the key there. If they're working hand in hand, then it's kind of like you're also using your project manager as a sponsor. You're bringing them information, and vice versa. So they're keeping me on track. They're keeping our entire project on schedule. They're looking for risks. They're making sure stakeholders are engaged. I'm bringing all of the process improvement knowledge and saying, hey, here's this information. These are the next things. And it can be, they don't have to know everything, just like I don't know everything about project management. And so a collaborative relationship can be formed, and it works really well.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you so much. A big round of applause for Tabitha and Candice. Thank you so much for a great presentation today. A lot of wonderful information, and I'm sure our colleagues will connect back with some additional questions. Over to you, Krista.
Thanks so much, Candice, Tabitha. Love the presentation. Love how you've mingled the two, the change management with the process management. So thank you very much for presenting today. Thanks. Also, everybody, great questions. We're going to take another short break. Just feel to stand up, walk around for a few minutes. We'll be coming back together for our final presentations. Thank you.